I'd love to say that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to share in just a moment. But we're 2.5 years deep into this podcast, so we all know the truth. When you think about it, the lifestyle cultivated by military moves is actually kind of ideal for those who might be drawn to murder. Take the Navy, for instance. Many of their warm weather duty stations are popular vacation spots, bringing in a variety of potential victims. I'm looking specifically to Hawaii, Southern California, and Florida, and maybe a tiny bit less at Guam. Assignment to those locales for sailors are temporary and shifting. In the last few years, it certainly appeared that one such sailor lived up to that hypothetical life I just laid out, picking up an indictment for murder in Hawaii just weeks into a life sentence in Florida for the same crime. This is Conduct Unbecoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. On September 19, 1982, Delta Airlines staff approached Hawaiian authorities to report their colleague, Kathy Warnett Hicks, missing. Kathy, a reservationist for Delta from Atlanta, and her coworkers were on Oahu for a Delta Airlines softball tournament. Her colleagues reported that Kathy had failed to come back to the hotel they were staying in, and shared that she'd met a man a few nights earlier at the Tiki Club on Hickman Air Force Base, or what's now Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickman. Kathy hadn't been without friends in Oahu. One of her Atlanta friends gave Kathy contact information for someone in Oahu, people she could hang out with and spend some time with. That friend was a married sailor, and he and his wife took Kathy to the Tiki Club at Hickman. But a cousin of Kathy's also lived on Oahu. He was a first lieutenant in the Army stationed at Schofield Barracks. On Kathy's first night in Oahu, September 14th, her cousin and his wife picked her up from the airport, and she spent the night at their place before checking into the hotel that she and her colleagues were staying in. They also planned to spend the evening of September 17th together, but Kathy told her cousin that she didn't need a ride. A new friend was going to give her one. Kathy didn't show. When Kathy saw her cousin the following morning, she explained that they planned to go to a club on a military base, and she thought that would be Schofield Barracks, but it turned out it was Hickman Air Force Base. When she sought out a payphone to tell her cousin where she was, her new friend explained how far they were from Schofield Barracks and dissuaded her. I think it's pretty reasonable to conflate all the bases if it's a world you're not familiar with. So Kathy and her cousin planned for her bookend visit back to them, for her to spend the night after she checked out of the shared hotel on September 19th. After the tournament wrapped for the day on September 18th, Delta Airlines, or whoever was hosting the softball tournament, also held a banquet to round out the experience. That banquet ran long, ending sometime between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. But it was one of those last nights in paradise, and everyone was young. So sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., Kathy introduced her roommate to her new male friend, either Tommy or Tony. While chatting with Kathy's roommate, Tommy, or Tony, shared that he was a Navy sailor and had been in Hawaii for about 2 years. Kathy's roommate learned that prior to arriving in Hawaii, Tommy, or Tony, was in Jacksonville, Florida. And the roommate got a pretty good look at him. So when they reported Kathy missing, she worked with an artist to put together a sketch. Kathy and Tommy, or Tony, left her room at about 1 a.m. to go downstairs and sit by the hotel pool. She wouldn't be gone long, so she took only her room key and a bit of cash. They ran into two more friends in the hallway and rode the elevator down to the first floor together, but that's where they parted ways. The friends that rode the elevator described Tommy, or Tony, as a black man approximately 26 to 27 years old, between 5'11" and 6'1", with short black hair, brown eyes, and a lighter complexion. Sometime after leaving that hotel room, Kathy was assaulted, strangled to death, and abandoned. At about 10 a.m. the following morning, or I guess 9 hours later on the same day, runners found her body in a secluded gulch. Kathy's body looked like it had been thrown from the side of the road. It had cleared the first 4 or 5 feet of grass, leaving it undisturbed. Then her body rolled about 20 feet down the slope before finally coming to a stop. Kathy was mostly dressed but was shoeless, and she bore scratches on the right side of her neck, a bloody lip, and bruised and swollen eyes. Investigators racing to identify the body they discovered learned of the missing persons report Kathy's coworkers filed, and inquired who might be able to confirm whether the body they found was Kathy's. One of her colleagues did the unimaginable and went to the morgue at about 4:30 p.m. on the 19th, confirming the woman they found was Kathy. When police in Honolulu phoned Kathy's next of kin, they asked for Mr. Hicks. The person who answered confirmed that was him, and they disclosed that Kathy had been murdered, and that they'd discovered her body. Except it wasn't Mr. Hicks, Kathy's father, but rather Kathy's 15-year-old brother, Braylon Hicks. He described Kathy as his best friend and one of his protectors. Perhaps shaped by that trauma and the decades that followed without answers, he went on to become a police officer in Georgia. When performing Kathy's autopsy, investigators recovered semen from her body, but deemed it unclear whether she had participated in consensual, unprotected sex in the 80s at the start of the AIDS epidemic, or if she had been sexually assaulted on the night she was killed. They did not find alcohol or barbiturates in her blood, and did not identify any signs of genital trauma. Just 2 years later, in 1984, Florida authorities recovered the body of Pamela K. Haynes, also 25 years old. She was found in the yard of an abandoned house in Sanford, Florida. Pamela, originally from Stillwater, Minnesota, was a Navy seaman apprentice, stationed at the Orlando Naval Training Center. She'd graduated from basic training just 2 days before her body was discovered, and was waiting to receive her orders for apprentice training school. When she was recovered, she was dressed only in her underwear. Her whites were discarded nearby with her purchases from a shopping trip. With her basic training done, Pamela had gone shopping to pick up makeup, soap, a swimsuit, and a bike lock. Her uniform trousers still held $100 in cash in its pockets, so investigators ruled out robbery. Much like Kathy, Pamela was found beaten and strangled to death. But the evidence was clear that she'd been raped prior to her death. Her assault had been violent, and experts opined that her strangulation took approximately 8 minutes. She had subcutaneous hemorrhages along her hairline and behind her left ear, along with contusions on her neck and trauma to her nose. She displayed early cerebral edema. The pressure of her killer's hands fractured her hyoid, but a series of tiny marks under her chin were discovered to be from Pamela's own fingernails. Small slices made as she tried desperately to pry her murderer's hands from her neck, trying to breathe and to live. During that struggle, she also scraped up her killer's skin cells. In 1995, 2 partial DNA profiles were extracted from the semen on Pamela's underwear and the epithelial cells from under her fingernails. But DNA science was still in its infancy, and investigators were unable to link the 2 samples. It took years to confirm the semen and skin cells belonged to just one man. In 2005, the Army Criminal Investigation Lab developed a full suspect DNA profile and entered it into CODIS, with no matches. It wasn't until 2019, 35 years after Pamela's death, when her family finally caught a break in the form of DNA evidence linking former sailor Thomas Lewis Garner to her murder. By the time the DNA confirmed the link, Garner was already a suspect. He was identified as a suspect using forensic genealogy, the same process that brought in the Golden State Killer. Florida investigators staked out his apartment and collected household trash he discarded. Inside the trash, investigators found a cigarette butt, a cotton swab, and a used piece of dental floss. Garner lived alone, so they were confident the items were his. Garner was 59 years old when the DNA match was made. He'd been 24 when Pamela died. It's not clear to me whether Garner was a dental hygienist in the Navy or if he became a dental hygienist when he transitioned to civilian life. But I guess the pertinent takeaway is that Garner was working as a dental hygienist in Jacksonville, Florida, when his DNA pinged. Just when we got past the dentist killing Cecil the lion, Garner slides in to make us all a little more cautious when we recline in the dental chair. After the DNA match was made, police contacted Garner and asked if he'd like to talk. So he sat for a consensual sworn recorded interview. He confirmed that he was in the Navy and in Florida when Pamela was murdered. But Garner claimed he suffered from memory problems, explaining that he couldn't really remember getting in trouble. Well, then he disclosed that he'd been in fisticuffs with someone named Ron Sanders, and that the fight landed him briefly in the brig. Investigators inquired if Garner knew Pamela, showing him her picture. He said he didn't recognize her and had never had contact with her. So they broadened their questions, asking if Garner ever spent time with the recruits. He said he did not. During the interview, investigators noted that Garner was sweating profusely, that his hands were shaking, and that he was consistently fidgeting. I don't think his denials were surprising, but they were enough to commit Garner to a story that he never had voluntary sexual contact with Pamela, that there was no legitimate reason his DNA might be on her body. With that DNA evidence in hand, Florida brought charges against Garner. The trial took just 4 days in May 2021, and the jury spent just 2 hours deliberating before they convicted Garner for the first-degree murder of Pamela. Garner, then 61 years old, began serving his life sentence for murdering Pamela. 43 days later, grand jurors in Hawaii indicted him for Kathy's murder. Back in 2017, Honolulu detectives had requested the forensic unit process evidence from Kathy's case. And, with the advancements in modern science, they were able to pull a DNA profile from the underwear Kathy wore when she was killed. So, Garner got another government-funded trip to Hawaii, this time to sit trial for Kathy's murder. Detectives had learned of the DNA match in Kathy's case and, after pulling his military service records, learned that Garner was stationed in Hawaii from April 1980 to October 1982, just a month after Kathy was killed. At the time of his enlistment 3 years before Kathy's murder, Garner was 5'11", 155 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes, so pretty consistent with Kathy's friends' descriptions. A photo provided by Garner's ex-wife, taken in early 1990, depicted a man similar to the composite sketch Kathy's colleagues contributed to. But it had been decades, and the woman who rode the elevator with Kathy and Tommy, or Tony, was unable to positively identify the man she saw with Kathy in the early morning hours of September 19, 1982. She selected 3 photos that she believed were possible matches, which included the photo of Garner. Kathy's roommate from that softball trip also couldn't identify Garner specifically. The prosecutor in Hawaii was barred from disclosing that Garner had just been convicted of murdering Pamela in a similar way. Kathy's family knew, though. They'd traveled down from Atlanta to Florida for his trial and watched as the Florida jury adjudged him guilty. They hoped for the same result. As a total hypothetical, a man trapped by his admission that he did not have consensual sex with a dead woman who had his DNA learned a lesson when confronted with a round of questions about a second dead woman. Perhaps that man learned that there might be a benefit to admitting to having sex with the second woman. Perhaps that admission could create reasonable doubt. In some way or another, at trial, Garner explained that he dropped Kathy back off at the hotel and she must have been killed sometime after that. I couldn't find any sources that indicated that Garner testified and either admitted or denied having sex with Kathy prior to her death. Garner's defense counsel argued that the prosecution's case was built on DNA, but said, quote, "I mean, anyone can have DNA," which feels a little dismissive of the science, but we're not exactly living through a pro-science moment in history. I don't have the ratio for Kathy's case and the DNA match, although his lawyer's comments make it seem like they concede his DNA was on Kathy. And that's kind of why I would like the clarity on whether he admitted to engaging in consensual sex with Kathy. But in Pamela's case, the odds of the DNA belonging to anyone except Garner was 700 billion to 1, or approximately the same odds of my alma mater having a winning football season this year. 41 years after Kathy's murder, a jury wound its way back into the box after 2 days of deliberation and announced that they'd found Garner not guilty. I'll note that the Honolulu Police Department website still lists Kathy's murder as solved. For whatever it's worth, and I don't think it's much, it does appear that Garner appealed his conviction in Florida, but it's not clear on what grounds he appealed because the Florida Appellate Court opinion on his matter consists only of the word affirmed. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com or on conductunbecomingpod.com. Join me next time when we delve into the spectrum of behavior that falls somewhere between conduct unbecoming and adultery. Until then, take care. Conduct Unbecoming is a podcast where I get to talk about interesting crimes and cases that involve U.S. military service members. I research, write, and produce the podcast myself. The opinions expressed are my own, and perhaps it's obvious. Conduct Unbecoming is not approved, authorized, or endorsed by the Department of Defense, or by their new preferred name, the Department of War.